we act. So it's almost in a very simplistic sense, like, for example, a computer has the outer shell and the keyboard and everything. That is what we see, and that is the gross aspect of the computer. But then you have this inner mechanism of not just the software which makes it work, but also other processes inside the computer, which all of them is why this computer really works, right? So even if we take those two things and compare it to how we have here, so we can look at ourselves as essentially three bodies, one not necessarily within each other, but as a notional wise, we can look at as if they are one within each other. So we have this gross body or stula sharira, which is comparable to this computer shell that we talked about. Then the next one is the subtle body, or the mechanism by which everything happens. And I will break it down even further. And then we have something else, which is called as a causal body. The causal body is really which determines all our desires, which drives to us to what we are. So this being the case, the subtle body is the Sukshma Sharira. The subtle body is the Sukshma Sharira here. And this Sukshma Sharira is basically made of the ego or the individuality, ahankara we call it, or the I factor, the mind, the intellect, and the memories, the stored memories. Now, these stored memories are different from what we called as a Karana Sharira, but this is basically what the Sukshma Sharira is made up of. Now, in this is just another diagram to show how we have our body, which helps me in my journey to employ for the service of others, the mind, which is the seat of emotions through which I convey what my desires and passions, which are letting me act in this world through the mind, the intellect, which actually is the boss of the mind, which really tells the mind what it should be doing. If the mind is too strong, then it doesn't listen to the intellect, but we have to allow the intellect to really drive things. And here is the ego. So ego, you have these four major components of the major components, out of which, of course, the mind, intellect, and ego is the subtle body or the Sukshma Sharira. So how does that relate to now the Atman? We will look at that. So the Atman, in a sense, is everywhere. It encompasses even this whole structure that I just said. And in the context of my true self, I am actually this Atman, but I have taken up all these instruments of the body, mind, and intellect. All these are nothing but instruments, but I'm in a sense Atman. And this Atman, in the sense of the total space, total thing, if you look at it, Brahman is everywhere, but the same Brahman in the form of Atman is how my individual self can be recognized. So a simple example of this one is you can consider Brahman as, space. Now we can sort of consider space, which is also very, very subtle. So space is everywhere. And that space which is within a particular room, for example, could be called as an Atman. So the reason we say this, within ourselves, we are conditioned by this body, mind, and intellect, which are kind of the walls, which is sort of so-called conditioning the Atman. And that's why I put this up. So what is it that undergoes rebirth and everything? Now you can see, as per this diagram, Atman is everywhere, which is Atman is just a subset of Brahman, right? So this is everywhere. This really does not undergo transmigration when when somebody dies. So going back to our diagram here, this diagram here. So when somebody dies, you have this sthula sharira, the gross body is the one which falls off, but this entire subtle body, which is comprised of the mind, intellect, ego, etc., along with the karana sharira, which you're not able to see here, that whole complex basically undergoes transmigration. So it's this, so this one undergoes transmigration, the gross body falls off, and Atma, which is really the whole thing here, Atman just basically goes back to being part of Brahman. Atman is just here. But when the subtle body is going from, this is at the time of realization. But when the Sukshma Sharira is still not realized, when it is going from one body to another, at that time, Atman is still part of the Sukshma Sharira. So that is still there. So you can think about it. And if any questions are there on this one, we can continue this discussion also. But I wanted to expand the question that was asked last week. Okay, so now moving forward to where we are with the second chapter, we saw how Lord Krishna is now trying to address Arjuna's grief with 4 different levels of understanding. At the level of Atma, which we already saw in shlokas 11 to 25, Lord Krishna tried to give Arjuna the highest knowledge, and in that he indicated about how the if Arjuna could only identify himself with Atma, and if you saw that diagram over there, where Atma by itself, without the conditionings, really has no grief, because the grief was in the mind. So in that sense, Atma is free of grief. If Arjuna could understand just that, then the game is over. We would not have needed all these 700 shlokas of Bhagavad Gita. But then Arjuna, this being only the second chapter, and the second chapter is only the contents, we saw that Arjuna still, Arjuna could not grasp that concept because he was still so full of shoka and moha. So then we had Lord Krishna, who came back and explained about from the level of the world. And in the level of the world, we saw this aspect of this transmigration, which we just saw, of the different bodies and everything. And this was, we discussed this at length, at the level of the fact that Lord Krishna reminds him that to consider himself as a Sukshma Sharira, because the gross body just falls off, right? Now, even that, Arjuna was finding it difficult to accept it. So that is when the whole of last week, we spent the time understanding from the level of my profession. From the professional level, we saw how Krishna explained about Arjuna's role as a Kshatriya. And today we will be reviewing that really quickly, rather quickly, but I just wanted to make sure we review it as a kind of a summary, and in relation to what we're going to be discussing about the role of karma. Again, in second chapter, the role of karma is being given in only as in a brief, just a kind of a brief introduction, because it really flows from one thing to another on how Arjuna's understanding needs to come about. And because Arjuna is a Kshatriya, Arjuna is a man of action, a man of dynamic action. So that need to be brought out. So in shloka number 31, which we saw last time, it's this is the point of looking into the dharmic aspect. And we see Lord Krishna wanting to now get to Arjuna to understand from a moral standpoint also, how he needs to see his role in the whole Dharma Yuddha. So in this shloka, which was Swadharmam api chavekshya, na vikampitum arhasi, dharmyati yuddhat shreyon anyat, kshatriyasya na vidyate. So we saw how Lord Krishna tries to convince Arjuna to look at the whole war as a very righteous war. And since it's a righteous war, and since we had Arjuna trained himself as a Kshatriya, there was millions of dollars spent on educating him to be a Kshatriya. And this was a time where now it was a giving back to the community by fighting. So, and with Arjuna wanting to run away, Krishna wants to bring him back to terms with that, the fact that he's now a Kshatriya and he needs to fight this, because there could be nothing best that can happen to a Kshatriya than doing his duty. So he wants to remind him of his duty. So in this set of shlokas, we can now also see the relevance to our own lives on how, when we have been trained in a certain profession, how it behoves us to give the best possible in that profession, whatever we are in, and not really shy away from doing the duty. So last week, we discussed quite a few examples with the role of the doctor, the role of the teacher, the role of the policeman, everything. So in that sense, we discussed about Swadharma, and what is truly the Swadharma is based upon really the skills that I have and the passion that I have for something is what determines really what my Swadharma is when compared to many people. So this brings up to this beautiful shloka, which is Yadrichya Chopapannam Swarga Dwaram Apavritam Sukhina Kshatriyah Partha Labhante Yuddha Midrisham. This shloka to me was very, very nice, powerful shloka, which really says, and I want to bring this two quotations here because it really goes well with these two quotations, which is chance favors the prepared mind and opportunity favors the bold. So we have actually Lord Krishna reminding Arjuna that he being so qualified, an opportunity has just come to him and all he needs to do is just execute it. And if he were to execute it, he would be getting such a great, prize. And the prize is that he will get to go to Swarga. And this actually brings to me a very beautiful, I'm sure many of you saw this wonderful television movie that was created recently called Entaro Mahanubavalu. The reason I bring that up is we see this person, Raghavan Manian, who is the student of Balamurali Krishna. He was doing his own thing, being a musician and everything in wherever he was. And suddenly you have him, Bombay Jnanam spots him from somewhere. And lo and behold, he gets to be part of this beautiful movie on Saint Tyagaraja. And now that movie has gone so viral, and suddenly you see Raghavan Manian becoming so famous because of this thing. So it is Yadrichaya Chopapannam. It just came to him by chance, or that is how we think it does. But in a sense, the shloka reminds us again about when I'm skilled in something and I continue to do my job well, I never know when the opportunity will come. For sure, it will come, but we never know the timing. And so this shloka really brought to me that aspect of being ready at any point in time, because chance favors the favored mind and opportunity favors the bold, as Louis Pasteur says here. The other one, which is opportunity does not waste time with those who are unprepared. So again, the message for us is to be open and flexible and not to be closed for any opportunities. So just one thing I wanted to bring that up. In Shloka 33, now you saw then Lord Krishna tightening up the screws a little bit on Arjuna, telling him that if Arjuna still is thinking about running away, then he for sure is going to incur a lot of sin or papam. And we discussed last time about what exactly is papam. Papa here, basically, we said is when we do not do what we are supposed to do, or when we are doing something which we are not supposed to, in both the cases, then we incur sin. So again, many people may we look at sin as something which happens in the future. But we can actually see that in very simple examples. For example, if I know that I want to lose weight and I end up eating a lot of chocolate, I see the sin of committing that fallacy immediately of putting on some weight, right? So this is at the gross level, it is easy to see that. But we being, as I mentioned earlier, this aspect of there's a subtlety to us. And what we do as an action, knowingly or unknowingly, we have no idea when the result will happen, because the result is dependent upon so many other factors, which is out there, which we may not even be able to fathom this aspect. So that is what we discussed about sin last time. Then we discussed about the shlokas of 34 to 37, where Lord Krishna now tries to, he has a little more sterner view of the whole thing, and he reminds Arjuna about 3 different ways that he is going to lose the faith of his people. Number 1, by his own people, akirtim chapi bhutani kathaishyanti te vyayam sambhavitasya cha akirtihi maranad ati richyate. And he reminds him that this kind of dishonor of running away is even worse than death. So Arjuna, don't even think about it. And then he reminds him that even from the enemy side, if he were to do something like that, people will think that he is withdrawn out of fear, and he would not be respected at all. And then in Shloka 36, we saw avachya vadamshcha bahun vadishyanti tava hitaha nindantas tavar samadhyam tato dukkhataram nukim. He tells him that even the foot soldiers will make fun of him, and that is not something that Arjuna would want to. So with that, finally, Lord Krishna finishes the aspect on dharma by telling him that, by reminding that either way, whether he dies or whether he continues to live, both of them would be really a win-win situation for him. And he asks him, Tato yuddhaya krita nishchayaha. So be firmly determined to fight. So when he says firmly determined to fight, then Arjuna must have looked at Krishna and said, what do you mean? How can I really have a firm determination to fight? Or how can I firm up my determination to fight? Krita nishchaya, how can I do that? So for that one, we're going to see the shlokas of the role of karma. How does the role of karma falls into place? So the right understanding of a situation will determine whether it's a golden opportunity or a crisis, is what Krishna is trying to remind to Arjuna, because as we saw in chapter 1, Arjuna had the wrong understanding of the situation, and therefore for him, the whole war was going to be a huge crisis. But Lord Krishna reminds him that this was really a golden opportunity for him, by fighting which he gets he gets to go to heaven, and he gets to fulfill his dharma. So in all this, it was a win-win situation. So from Shloka 38 onwards, as we see, the standpoint of karma comes into play. And here we see that basically, as I said, when Arjuna was looking at him as to how really can he fight with determination, Lord Krishna is really trying to tell him that, in a sense, you have to make sure that, Krishna really recognizes that Arjuna is very intelligent and he's really smart. So he wants to give him now some more, basically, you would say, arguments, or some more points towards making him sure that he really knows how to move ahead and start to looking into fighting. So one beautiful example that Gurudev really gives is, in order to really know on how to tackle these challenges, one really should know how to ride the waves. So I have this picture of the surfer here. So the surfer knows very well that this ocean has all these big waves and small waves. And it is up to him to be alert and intelligent to know when to ride the small waves and when to ride the big waves. He cannot really say, oh no, I cannot ride this wave or I cannot ride the other wave. He needs to really fight both the small waves, the big waves, or any other challenges that might happen in the ocean. He needs to really know how to play that game with the waves. And you see how Lord Krishna starts to remind Arjuna about how life is really a game and he needs to know how to play it. So the shloka that Krishna is telling Arjuna is, Sukha dukhe same kritva labha labhau jaya jayau. Sukha dukhe same kritva labha labhau jaya jayau. Tatho yuddhaya yujyasva. Tatho yuddhaya yujyasva. Naivam papam avapsyasi. Naivam papam avapsyasi. So he says, Sukha dukkha. Sukha dukkhe. Keep your balance of mind in pleasure and pain. Same kritva. The balance of mind. Labha labhav jaya jayau. So in gain and loss, labha and alabha, jaya and ajaya, jaya in victory and in defeat. Tatho yuddhaya, yujyasva, engage yourself in battle for the sake of battle. And once you do that, you're not going to incur any sin. Na evam papam avapyasi. So there is no way that you will incur any sin in all these cases. So let us see this a little more closely. With first is, how can we really practice this? How is it possible to ride the waves, to ride these waves of ups and downs in our lives? We go through this all the time. Our life is full of ups and downs. There are rarely times where we say that my mind is balanced. So the reason why we are not able to keep our mind balanced is that we are inherently filled with so many likes and dislikes. We have our own preferences, and we always, when we tend to act in something, we want the result to be exactly how I want it. We are already designing our result even as I'm acting out. So when we have these kind of strong likes and dislikes, even before performing an action, how do we think that we can ever maintain this equipoise, this balance of mind? So if I don't have an equipoise of mind even before I act, then when the result comes, there is an even greater expectation about how it is going to, the expectation that I start with, it just does not work. So this is why Lord Krishna says, just have your mind in equilibrium. Just one word, even before we start to work. Once I do that, then whatever happens is, I recognize, is not in my hands. Like how in Upadeshasaram we have the shloka, Karturagnyaya prapyate phalam, karma kim param, karma tajjadam. So the action by itself is inert. I need to work in the world with humility and surrender, and to recognize that the result is not in my hand, because it's a complex set of variables. So when I have this, then it is, so ultimately the idea is, because I have all these likes and dislikes, my action itself is tainted. My action is tainted with an expectation of the design of the result. And this is why our mind is we are unable to keep our mind really balanced. So Lord Krishna reminds that really consider this life as a game. Try to play it like a good sportsman. And he's trying to tell us, don't get yourself bogged down if you don't win the game. If you're playing a game of tennis, for example, after the game is over, if you don't win, get into this habit of saying, better luck next time, praise the great shot of the opponent. And instead, we allow our ego to affect us and keep saying that, why is it that my game is not good? Why is it this one? Of course, there is the thing about lessons being learned, but we fail to recognize that there could be so many influences on why the game did not work out. But if I have this ability to reach out and to recognize my opponent's game in how it went, that is a start. So now the other thing is that we tend to identify so much with our success, with what we think is needed. So that also leads to a certain amount of compromise with the action itself. We are wanting, as I said, the design of the result being what is needed. With that, our life gets compromised. So again, in this shloka, there are so many points that can be brought out. I'm just bringing out a few of them. So by expectation of a certain result, which is sukha dukkhe samekritva, by not having that balance, then I tend to compromise even in my action itself. And because of that, my work itself suffers because of this compromise. So again, Lord Krishna's advice here is, don't let the outer situation enter into the privacy of your mind. This is the privacy of the mind, which is being agitated by this expectation of the result. So with that in mind, try to play life as a game and just ride the waves of samsara. So that having said, now we see Lord Krishna trying to remind Arjuna about what exactly is, he's getting in one step at a time into this aspect of karma yoga, but he doesn't necessarily call it karma yoga. So we'll see what he says in this shloka. Esha te bihita sankhye, Esha te bihita sankhye, buddhir yoge tvimam shrunu, buddhir yoge tvimam shrunu, buddhya yukto yaya partha, buddhya yukto yaya partha, karma bandham prahasyasi. karma bandham prahasyasi esha te abhihita sankhye. Esha, so far, esha te abhihita sankhye. So whatever has been taught so far. So Lord Krishna is telling Arjuna that when I started to tell you all this, which is, if you remember, it starts from shloka number 11, from Ashocyananva Shochastvam Prajna Vadamshcha Bhashase. From there on, all the way up to almost the 26, 29 shlokas, all that is Sankhya Yoga. Not the later part about dharma or anything, that is not Sankhya, but the earlier part. So, and not only that, here he calls him Buddhi Partha. He calls him Partha because if you remember the word Partha, there are two meanings for it. One of them we saw in, I think it was the Dhyana Shlokas, where Partha Pa stands for Paramartha, Artha, and Paramartha, Artha stands for wealth. So Partha means the one who considers Paramartha has his supreme wealth. So Lord Arjuna always had that great devotion for Lord. So you see Partha where he considers Paramartha as his Lord. So that is one meaning of Partha. The other one is Partha is the son of Pritha or Kunti. So here Krishna is addressing Arjuna as Partha and he says, hey Partha Shrunu, Esha te abhihita sankhya. So far, whatever I have said is about that wisdom of Atma. And now what I'm going to tell you is the Buddhi Yoga. Buddhi Yoga, or what is the vision of how you can translate that Sankhya Yoga into a practical application. So that is what he's trying to give here in this case. Now, we're going to see this shloka quite in detail because there are so many words here which I think we need to understand, which is, for the first time, the word yoga has been introduced. And then what is Sankhya? Because as some of you may know, Sankhya is also another philosophy. So let us look into all those. And then, of course, karma bandham prahasyasi. So I have these three things here. What is yoga? The word yoga is, of course, a very popular word. Everyone knows yoga as asanas or pranayama. But the word yoga actually comes from the word yuj. Yuj, or to yoke. Yoke, or to join. So once we say this word of yuj or yoke or to join, there are so many meanings that can come out of it, or so many places where the word yoga can be used. For example, japa can be called as yoga. Doing puja can be called as yoga. And even this aspect of the union with, or the realization, the self-realization, that is also yoga. So yoga can be two things. Yoga can be the process of leading to the higher. So in that sense, it is a form of purifying the mind so that I get the clarity of vision. Or the other aspect I said, it is the direct means, or it can mean the nature of Atma also. So these are all the kind of meanings of yoga. And in another context, yoga is also, it is agahita samarthyam, which is the ability to attain the impossible. So that is also called as yoga. And Swami Chinmayananda actually refers to yoga in, he says there's about 82 different forms of yoga. This was 82 forms of yoga even before Vyasa really wrote the Mahabharata. So Vyasa probably wanted to introduce this new term, Buddhi Yoga, and to indicate that this yoga is something which is, Buddhi Yoga is where somebody is intelligent enough to translate the knowledge of Sankhya into actual practical application. So he says, Shrunu, listen to me, where I'm going to expound on this Buddhi Yoga. And that is, so I thought I'll take the time to give you this flavor of yoga from so many different angles, whereas we have an idea of yoga as only pranayama or asanas, but yoga basically means, it comes from the word yuj, to join, and essentially it is the yoking or the combining or joining our lower self to the higher self. So that is truly the meaning of what yoga means. And that can be translated, as I showed, to many different ways. And every time, whether it's japa yoga, or even for that matter, when I'm totally engrossed in my work where I've forgotten my own transactional identity, that also could be called as yoga, where I'm in tune with the higher. So the word yoga in Sanskrit now you see has got so many meanings. Now, when you look at the word Sankhya, the word Sankhya actually comes from the word Sankhya, where in Sankhya, it means the root for Sankhya comes from the word kya, and the kya word is the word, kya is the dhatu, which means either to know, it can also mean to tell or inform, etc. So samyak khyayate anaya iti is Sankhya. And Sankhya, the word basically means, the word is to samyak khyayate anaya atma tattvam iti Sankhya, means that by which you know Atma, Tattvam, the Atma Tattvam, the nature of self, that is called Sankhya, and that by which you come to know Atma Tattvam is actually Sankhya. So Sankhya is the aspect of knowing Atma Tattvam. Atma Tattvam itself is Sankhya. So Sankhya is Atma Tattvam. Sankhya is that knowledge by which you know Atma Tattvam. So Sankhya basically refers to all the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra, etc. So Upanishad Shabdena Vidya Uchyate is called Upanishad Pramanam, or Vedanto Nama Upanishad Pramanam. So Sankhya is a Brahma Vidya or Upanishad, and that is really what is the knowledge which is there in Bhagavad Gita. Now, having mentioned this, the word Sankhya also means to count. And in some of the RSS parades, they use the word Sankhya to count, which means, 1, 2, 3, 4. When you count it in Sanskrit, that is also called Sankhya. So Sankhya as a philosophy is the one which talks about the Purusha and the Prakriti and the 24 Tattvas and everything. So that is different. So I just want to make sure we distinguish in the shloka from that Sankhya, whereas here the word Sankhya refers to the knowledge of Atma. Now let's talk about this karma bandham prahasyasi. Now here Krishna is trying to remind Arjuna about how the various ways in which a mind gets bound by the karmas. So anytime when we do a karma where I'm not really paying full attention to it. So that's why he says, Shrunu, we pay attention to it and understand how that those karmas which are done without paying complete attention to it, those tend to form the bandham. And so it becomes a bandham. And now I'm going to teach you the karma yoga, that yoga which will take you outside this aspect of bandham, how you can get rid of the bondages. So that is karma bandham prahasyasi. So the shloka basically stays now. So far, what he has taught is this aspect of Sankhya Yoga, and now the wisdom which he's going to impart is the Buddhi Yoga, which translates later on. We will call that, we get into this aspect of Karma Yoga. Now, why did he not want to use the word Karma Yoga in the beginning? One may ask this. Let's skip a shloka. Now, the reason why he didn't use the word karma yoga immediately is because Arjuna was already aware of the karma kanda, which is part of the first part of Vedas. Now, in this first part of Vedas, which is all about karmas, which is all about doing the karmas, and those karmas are nothing but rituals. And those rituals are done to get the higher worlds, swargam, or anything that one wants. One can actually do these rituals and one can get those. So Arjuna was aware of that karma. So in order to not confuse him with that aspect, we have this yoga called Buddhi Yoga that was introduced. So Krishna continues on in the shloka 40 to say that how in this application of Buddhi Yoga, he's trying to convince Arjuna that once he does this work, for example, with Sukha Dukkhe Same Kritva Labha Labho Jaya Jayo, where there is no, when he does with a balanced mind, then there is absolutely no loss of effort, etc. So let's see that. Neha Bhikramana Shosti. Neha Bhikramana Shosti. Pratyavayo na vidyate. Pratyavayo na vidyate. Swalpamapyasya dharmasya. Swalpamapyasya dharmasya. Trayate mahato bhayat. Trayate mahato bhayat. Na iha abhikramana shasti. Na iha abhikramana sha asti. Means that in this Buddhi Yoga, which is connected to the Moksha Marga, this yoga, there is really no destruction at all. Abhikrama, which is a direct meaning, which indicates that there is no loss of any beginning, which is there is no loss of effort at all. Any effort that you put in this, you will definitely move forward. And he says there is no pratyavaya dosha. Pratyavaya na vidyate. There is no dosha at all. Now we'll try to understand what exactly he's trying to say here. So in the Karma Kanda, which we talked about, in Karma Kanda with all the rituals that is there is a necessity to follow certain rules. I mean, this is the case, like, for example, if you're doing a puja, you start off with, of course, always cleaning the place and then making sure all the vessels are cleaned. And then you start with the 16 steps. So that is one form of ritual, right? Now, let us take even in a professional work, for example. When I want to start doing a project or something, I always, I start to look at what steps are needed as part of the project management, and then you start doing one step after the other in a sequential order. That is the word, which is krama. Krama meaning that in a sequential order, which we do it. But in this case, he's saying, and in those cases, if you don't follow that sequence, then what happens is one tends to not get the result, what was required, what we were looking for. Simple thing, for example, right now it is spring, and this is a good time to maybe plant some seeds if I'm going to do some permanent, if I'm going to put some flowers which are perennials, for example, or anything. Then I need to make sure that the ground is prepared, and then I put the seeds and then I water. I cannot water it and then put the seeds. So if I do that, I'm not going to get the result, right? So pratyavaya dosha is if you don't follow something in sequence, then you don't get the results. So here you have Krishna explaining to Arjuna, saying that in this Buddhi Yoga, you don't have to worry about it. It doesn't matter in what sequence you do it, you will still get the results so long as you follow this path. And then he says, Swalpam api asya dharmasya. Even a little practice of this knowledge will help you to become fearless. Trayate mahato bhayat. Okay, it leads to really being fearless. What a powerful shloka. So it basically, I don't have to be worried about anything. I don't have to be worried about what will happen to me or anything. It just protects me. Even this, following this path gives me a lot of protection and really saves me from anxiety and stress. So that is Lord Krishna's advice to him about how is trying to convince him about how this application of this knowledge is beneficial for Arjuna. Next, he's trying to give one more aspect of this this particular yoga. Vyavasayatmika buddhihi. Vyavasayatmika buddhihi. Ekeha kuru nandana. Ekeha kuru nandana. Bahushakahyanantascha. Bahushakahyanantascha. Buddhayo vyavasayinam. Buddhayo vyavasayinam. You can even say it as Buddhayaha avyavasayinam. That's why I wanted to mention here. So he says, Vyavasayatmika buddhihi. In this, there is the possibility of development of one-pointed determination. Vyavasayatmika buddhihi. Nishchayatmika buddhihi. And that is single-pointed. It is singular. Eke iha kuru nandana. He calls him now with another beautiful name here, calling him son of the Kuru dynasty, or the Kuru Vamsha. Alas, Bahushaka hi anantascha. Alas, many branched. Bahushaka. Shaka meaning branch, Bahu meaning many. Bahushakaha iti ananta, endless. Many, many branches in Buddhya avyavasayinam. For those who do not follow this, in that there is so many different possibilities. Whereas this particular path allows you a single pointed and a straight path to your goal. So Kuru Nandana, again referring to this and saying that Vyavasayatmika, meaning Nishyatam with absolutely no wavering. It gives you that clarity of vision. So you see how beautifully Lord Krishna is trying to help Arjuna see the bigger picture. So in the bigger picture, he wants him to develop that purity of mind and the clarity of vision. And that clarity of vision, which is possible only by a single pointed determination. So that buddhi, which is single pointed and in one direction, is what he's trying to show here. So I think we will stop here and we will try to look into the shloka a little more in detail next week. Because this word Vyavasayatmika is very beautiful. I think it needs a little more elaboration. So we will do that. And I would like to again chant Om Trayambakam 3 times to take care of praying to God for making sure the situation in India really eases out slowly. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Urvarukamiva Bandhanan Mrityor Mukshiyam Amritaat. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Urvarukamiva Bandhanan Mrityor Mukshiyam Amritaat. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Urvarukamiva Bandhanat Mrityor Mukshiyam Amritaat. Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. Sarve bhavantu sukhinaha. Sarve santu niramayaha. Sarve bhadrani pashyantu. Ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.
Thank you, Sunitha.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hari Om.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Hari Om.